All right, welcome back to Live Impact News. As we discussed, we are now joined by a very special guest. Jesse Richman is here to help us break down all of the bills that have been either passed, vetoed, amended, or left alone by Governor Abigail Spanberger. This is her first time as governor where she has been faced with these decisions. These are all the bills passed by the General Assembly that then went to the governor's desk where she had to make a decision on what to do with them. And I guess we'll start here. Is there one thing that jumped out to you above all others about the decisions she made in particular?
Well, so I think there were a few vetoes that came out in the last round that might have taken some people by surprise. There were some bills that had pretty broad support in the Democratic caucus, but nonetheless the governor decided these weren't appropriate. And these fell into a couple of different categories. For example, there was a mattress recycling bill which would have required a $20 fee to cover recycling costs on every mattress sold in the state, vetoed by the governor, supported by most of the Democratic Party, some Republicans as well. Some gaming industry things, some criminal justice things. I think maybe you see the governor's background in the justice system coming through in terms of stepping in to block some bills that would have changed aspects of the an effort, for example, to expand the value of vehicles that were seized or held by somebody that could be auctioned without a court becoming involved. Some limitations on plea bargaining that the governor intervened on. And so some bills where there were vetoes. On the other hand, though, many fewer vetoes than we saw in the last session. We had last time Democratic legislature, Republican governor, hundreds of bills vetoed. We're seeing a handful of bills vetoed in comparison. And so there are lots of bills that passed. And I'd say these fall into a couple of buckets. We can think about the sort of bipartisan bills. There were bills that had pretty wide support. Even in some instances, bills that a version of this bill had been blocked by Youngkin, now it goes through. For example, regulations on pharmacy benefit managers. That regulation had wide support from both parties, some opposition, but very, very modest opposition. And although a related bill had been blocked by Youngkin, that goes through with wide support. Variety of other bipartisan bills. And then they're the partisan bills, right? And sort of at the top of that, you might think of the minimum wage increase and collective bargaining for public employees, right? Some significant changes in state policy that are shifting in a kind of Democratic-coded partisan moving policy towards what we might think of as the left in the state.
And you mentioned the veto on the gaming industry and skill games. I'm wondering if we see that there's a casino in Portsmouth. We have a casino that is set to open at some point here in Norfolk. I know that skill games, oftentimes you'll see those in convenience stores, things of that nature.
Yep.
How big of an impact could this have on sort of the burgeoning casino industry here?
Well, so of course, skilled games in convenience stores and restaurants would have been expanding the competition for these casinos in some sense, right? And opens opportunities for restaurants and convenience stores potentially had that not been vetoed. This was a piece of legislation that was championed by some local legislators, but did not overcome the governor's veto. At least initially, the governor thought that this was insufficient regulatory protections with this. And there's another gaming industry veto which has a sort of different texture to it, and this was an effort to build a casino at Tyson's Corners up in Northern Virginia, opposed by the Fairfax County government. And this was a bill to force the local government to hold a referendum on the casino over their opposition. And the governor there argued that she was protecting local control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there differences there. Not much harm to the casinos we see here in the 757. If anything, possibly a benefit with those skill games still not being allowed in restaurants, bars, and convenience stores up in Northern Virginia. There's still local control as to whether they want a casino or not. Now, you also mentioned collective bargaining. It appears as though there's going to be amendments coming to, or amendments at least suggested, to some of the collective bargaining changes, lifting the prohibition on collective bargaining in the state. How do you anticipate that developing?
So there's a lot of texture still to be filled in. Also, regulatory language needs to be written. Part of what this bill does is create regulatory bodies which are then going to flesh out some of the details. So I think what we know is the outright ban on collective bargaining by state employees is lifted. Maybe not all restrictions. What I'm hearing from people at the university, for example, is they're anticipating that collective bargaining will become a possibility for some categories of employees, but not others. So faculty, not for faculty, but some of the administrative, clerical staff, janitorial staff, that sort of thing. They think that it will be available there. But the details are going to be partly the result of this regulatory fleshing out of this move. But it substantially expands the opportunities for collective bargaining by state employees. And what does that do? And local employees. And what does that do? That potentially, opponents argue this raises costs. Defenders argue this helps protect the rights of these employees and helps them get maybe fairer compensation.
And when we see that, expansions in CBA allowances, expansions in paid sick leave, family leave, medical leave, minimum wages, I'm wondering historically, how drastic of a shift is this toward a pro-labor environment for this state?
I think there's a shift towards pro-labor. There's generally a shift in policy where Virginia public policies are getting, with the Democratic trifecta in the before Youngkin, and then this one, we're moving towards having a set of public policies more like what we see north of us, more like what you see in Maryland, more like what you see in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, right? So we're getting more closely aligned with the policies in those states, less closely aligned with the policies that you see south of us in North Carolina, South Carolina, so forth.
And when we talk about some of those policies that are more aligned with the Northeast, gun control and cannabis markets, two major topics of discussion for the governor. I want to start with gun control. Some bills passed through even well before the deadline. The big one on a ban on assault weapons will have some amendments made to it. What stuck out to you about the changes to gun control policy?
And what we're seeing broadly with gun control policy is a move towards more restrictions, and this takes a variety of specific lines from trying to regulate further so-called ghost guns, which are no serial number, that sort of thing, to restricting assault weapons, to trying to raise the limits for purchase for some kinds of weapons, and so forth. So across a variety of different areas, you see mostly kind of incremental, some a little bit more than incremental, moves towards a more restrictive gun control regime in the state.
And that assault weapons ban on the sale and purchase of assault weapons, that not passed, suggested for amendments, including just additional clarity in general and perhaps changes toward how this would regulate game hunting shotguns. When you see that is one that has really gotten a lot of public attention. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that maybe that did not pass through like so many other of these?
Well, so that one, the tension on gun control is always, is often between, on the one hand, trying to protect legitimate uses of weapons, for example, in hunting, and on the other hand, trying to make it, the goal of gun control advocates is typically they argue that we need to try to keep guns out of the hands of people who will use them to do violence against other people, crime and so forth. And so how do you manage that balance? there's always controversy around the boundaries of that. This is an area with a lot of interest group activity, a lot of kind of cultural war issue, tensions around it sometimes, and so you have, there's some things that are easier to pass, like, hey, we're going to step up the penalties if you're you have kids in your house and you haven't secured the gun, right? That's sort of common sense. Most gun owners might agree, hey, I shouldn't have my gun be available for a small child to pick up and use. And then you get to the more controversial, right? Okay, so this is called an assault weapons ban, but is it really restricting some of the kinds of guns that women might like to use when they're hunting, for example? And so then it becomes more controversial.
And more controversial, does that speak to maybe why it was delayed with amendments as opposed to just passed through?
I think that might be part of the story. And we're seeing an ongoing negotiation. One of the interesting things in this legislative session generally is the question of just how fast do you move, right? And there are a variety of issues where that question's raised. For example, do you move to more than doubling the salaries of state legislators? Obviously, potentially something that could generate political backlash. But the legislators' salaries haven't been raised since 1988. And that's a long time, and the argument from the legislators is these aren't really covering anything close to just the expenses, and so how do you manage those tensions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and those tensions exist in the retail industry for cannabis as well. Now, the amendments to that bill maybe just look to me like it's a delay more than anything. Like that is going to be pushed to 2027 instead of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
What more goes into it that I may be missing? It appears as though the amendment is just a delay, more time needed to figure out how this retail market's going to work.
Yeah, I think that's mainly what's going on. The need to get a structure fully in place, make sure that possible problems have been dealt with, and trying to forestall as well the pushback, the blowback that might happen with a flawed implementation or one that ran into some kind of obvious problems.
Were you surprised that got delayed as opposed to passing?
A little bit. It's certainly been an agenda item, but on the other hand, I think this reflects again what we've seen from the governor in terms of some of the pushback. There's a affinity by Spanberger for the concerns of law enforcement, for the concerns of public safety kinds of issues, and in some instances, defendants' rights kinds of issues. And so I think this falls into that category broadly in terms of wanting to make sure we get the public policy right.
Yeah, and as we kind of observe the bills that have passed through, been amended, or vetoed, I want to ask a question more broadly, especially during the campaign. The right painted Spanberger as more of a left-leaning politician, whereas maybe if you were more so on the left, she was presented as someone who was more centrist. Mm-hmm. What you see here, does that sort of align with a more centrist approach to her first major actions as governor, or what would be your read on where this kind of falls as a summary? Well,
I think it's been a mixed bag. I think we see certainly some kinds of bipartisan legislative activity. We see in terms of the bills that had less Republican support, a fair amount of that nonetheless was legislation that had some degree of Republican support, but you see legislation like right to contraception legislation, which got a little bit of moderate Republican support, but mostly Democrats, Republicans arguing this goes too far and might be a backdoor to requiring abortificants or things like that be prescribed. The paid family medical leave, major policy changes. These didn't get a whole lot of Republican support this time, but on the other hand, we have seen The last Trump administration, we had some effort by the Trump administration to push through a federal medical family leave program. So I think we see some instances where the governor has pushed back against policies that maybe sounded good to most Democrats, but like, let's not go there. Mattress recycling, for example. Let's not tack on a $20 fee for every mattress anybody buys to fund mattress recycling. Let's just think about that a little more. Let's not go forward with that.
Yeah, so a mixed bag indeed. And, we've talked a lot about these bills. I'm wondering if you had time over the weekend to sort of observe the back and forth that happened with President Trump and Governor Spanberger. President Trump calling her out by name in some Truth Social posts, Spanberger responding. Any observations that you wanted to kind of expand upon?
Well, so the controversy there, I think, partly has to do with the affordability agenda, right? Republicans recognize that Spanberger and some other Democratic candidates have done very well pivoting to a kind of affordability agenda, highlighting voter concerns about cost of living, and the increase in gas prices as a result of the Iran war hasn't done anything to dampen the opportunities for Democrats to make an argument on that position. And so Trump's trying to push back, and the argument is some of the things Democrats are doing are things that are going to increase costs, right? And so you rejoin Regional Greenhouse Gas Coalition. What's that going to do? That's going to mean there are additional costs coming through utility bills, raising utility costs to help subsidize these efforts at reducing greenhouse gases. You raise the minimum wage, that's going to help minimum wage workers, but it might also raise the prices for some restaurants or agricultural work and so forth, convenience stores and so on. And so paid family medical leave. This is kind of pro-family. It's 12 weeks paid leave insurance system paid for partly by employees, partly by employers. But that's going to be something coming out of people's paychecks. It's going to be something coming out of employers' bottom lines to cover the costs. And so, right, there are things in the legislative agenda that do raise costs. At the same time, there are elements of the agenda that are aiming to restrict costs. And so, for example, the pharmacy benefit manager thing we talked about before. This is trying to cut down on the degree to which these people in the middle of the pharmaceutical market who are negotiating drug prices and then how much gets paid by consumers, cutting down their ability to have wide margins. And that could lower costs. We saw a bipartisan piece of legislation aiming at increasing the education of medical professionals in the state. Shortages of nurses on up in the medical system have been one of the cost drivers since the COVID-19 pandemic in healthcare. Trying to address that, maybe that brings down costs a bit long term. Changes to the rules around state redevelopment authority funds being used to help build affordable housing, trying to increase the availability of housing, right? So you can pick a certain element of that agenda and say, look, we're cutting costs, wonderful. You can pick another element and say, look, costs are being raised, horrible. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is there's a bit of both going on.
As is so often the case, it can be framed in any particular way, especially during campaign season, but like you said, a little bit of both going on. Dr. Jesse Richman, always a pleasure, Associate Professor of Political Science and Geography from Old Dominion University. We appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today, helping us break all of this down, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Great to talk.
All right, Dr. Richman joining us here in studio, a special treat for us as, again, that deadline last night for Governor Spanberger to approve, amend, veto bills that came across her desk that had already been approved by the General Assembly.